Hi, my name is Sabu Francis, and I am trying to explore the internet in a different way than traditional software developers. So I've been trying to ask a lot of questions on why is it that the internet doesn't work like real world spaces. And that is throwing up some very interesting insights, if you can call it. And because of those insights, I have been able to develop certain kinds of software and certain strategies which I am hoping would be useful in many different contexts. So one of the question is of this nature, that when I walk on the road, I am walking through those spaces there and I see people walking around me. And as it would happen, most of the time they're all strangers. I don't know them. But nevertheless, the experience is a very authentic one. What do I mean by authentic? It means that it's a very genuine experience, right? I'm not looking at ghosts over there. So let's say there is a situation which happens and I see two people fighting over there. I don't know those two people don't know me. Then the police come and they are asking people around, which includes me, on what is happening over there, what happened over there. And then I can possibly say this guy hit this guy and I saw this guy hitting this guy and all that. I can probably narrate the sequence of events. Now in this particular situation, remember that I really don't know who these two people are, and those two people don't know me. But yet, I'm able to give a very genuine explanation of what happened over there. This means that you can be anonymous and the thing which you do is pretty authenticated. It's pretty authentic. Okay. This particular situation does not really have a parallel on the internet. Say if I go on the net and I just want to participate in some conversation which is going on there. There could be some websites which will just allow you that without any registration login, you're just commenting. What is the difference there? Is it the same as what happened in the real world? No, because this time when I'm just participating without any registration or login, I'm anonymous, all right, but I don't know whether I am going to be authentic there, because the people who are participating in that really doesn't know whether I am genuinely only one person or have I come again with one more browser tab as one more person there. So that means you could be having multiple accounts participating in a conversation at such a website and steering the conversation away from the genuineness of whatever which is going on. It is inauthentic, that means. So this is the root of the reason why internet really doesn't allow these kind of interactions. And if you want to interact on a website, you will need to first register there, get yourself a username, and then to protect that username, you're given a password. This is what generally happens, and that's what we've been using it for last 20-25 years, ever since internet came in and people realize that you have to participate in interactive sessions where somebody will comment something or the other, and that is the way internet works, is what we assume. What is the deficiency is that today, if you're on the internet, very cursorily it looks as if it's what's happening in the real world, but honestly it is not. In the real world, in that scenario where two people were arguing and fighting and I was just a witness, one thing was very sure, that those two people were not at the same time somewhere else also, or I was not at another place when all this was happening. That's why it was authentic, right? Otherwise, if there's a chance that those two people were holograms, that means those two people really didn't exist there, and they were actually existing somewhere else, and the whole thing will become very inauthentic. Nobody will know which one is the true one. And probably there are movies which talk about these kind of science fiction and all that, where people can exist in two different places at the same time, or you can have horror stories or ghost stories. But the real life does not have ghosts, and experiences are always authentic. But in the internet world, you cannot have that parallel. The best which people did was to invent the authentication system to enter a site with a username and a password. And even after that, in many sites, you cannot really be very authentic, because you could go to that site and then register under a different name, and then now there are two people on the same site and they are steering the conversation. And people don't reflect on this, that people could be doing this. And you'd be surprised that in some serious sites, people actually do that. They really have a team of people, 50 of them sitting together in one room, and they say, okay, let me steer this conversation somewhere else. And all those 50 are actually participating as if they're all separate. They are indeed probably separate people there, but they can have multiple accounts. So you can have 2-3 tabs open and 2-3 browsers open. And these 50 people have become 150 people on that site, completely changing the nature of the conversation on that discussion group. You think it is difficult to believe? You see the movie The Great Hack, and then you'll understand the kind of messages which can be passed on to people to manipulate things. It's ridiculous. The kind of stuff which is going on is ridiculous. What is the alternative? One alternative which people suggested, and it is getting used, is that you register at say an important website or a large website. I will not call it important, like say Facebook or Google, and then you take there is a system called OAuth, and then other website says that, do you have a registration at Google or Facebook? And you say yes. And so that particular website, then there's a connection between that website and Google or Facebook, and it is called an OAuth, delegated authorization. So then that website asks Facebook and then gets itself authorized. So in such situation, there's a slight protection in multiple identities coming there, because it's not impossible. You can still open another browser or a private window and then have yet another Facebook account and then have one more person there. But and though both of you are the same, but it's slightly less chance of that happening. Also, you have an advantage that you don't have to remember passwords and all that, because you have already registered at Facebook and now you use that account to register in that other site. So that's called a delegated authorization. However, what has turned out, if you see the inside story, is that many of these authorization systems, all of it actually, the inventor of the OAuth system, the main author, he resigned in disgust. He said that this is not really serving the purpose, because in the meantime, what Facebook and others are doing is that they are joining hands with each other and exchanging data, doing data analytics on you. And then you go to one website, you go to another website, and you go to Facebook, and you find that all those websites are actually advertised in Facebook, and you wonder how Facebook was able to read your mind. So there is a whole lot of mess which is happening in the world when it comes to that initial entry point into an interactive session on some websites. What is the alternative? So I've been thinking about this problem, and it worries me that why is it that the internet are a bunch of such clever people, and why is it that there is no real alternative? Why are people not looking at alternatives? And being an architect, I'm pretty sensitized to the fact of how people walk around and use real world spaces and have authentic experiences there. So last year I started working on a different approach to this whole thing. It's called homing space, And then I further worked on it more because there was some criticism about that, so I discarded that code. And last couple of months I have developed a new kind of way of very, very authentic way of authenticating yourself, a very nice way of authenticating yourself on the internet for various websites. You can actually use it even for regular premises also if you want to, and that's called homing space. Now, how does this work and why is this needed? I have to give you some additional details of the problems which we currently have because of this username and passwords which we gave at Facebook and wherever link. So to put it simply, whenever you give a username and password, you are not the only person who has become a member on that website. There are other people who have also given their username and password. What choice does that particular website has but to put all of that username and password together into one database? Now, to ensure that somebody in the office does not peer into that database and then pick up that password, there is a system known as hashings. So when the data of the username and password of each person registering there goes into the database, the password is not directly written down into the database as a password, just in case that database is stolen, and then somebody can peer in and they can see the username and the password together. So what they do is that they hash it. So they create a kind of a code which means that password, and from that code nobody can reverse engineer it and get back to the password. So it's hashed. It's like your hash brown, if you want to look at it that way. So you have a username and you have the hashed version of the password. So there is a mathematical process which converts that password into a hashed version of that password. And these two values, the username and password, are stored there. Now I'm making it a little simple. There could be other fields like your name and your address and email address and all there. But let's concentrate on username and password. What is the deficiency is that, remember that username and password, that pair is like a key to enter that site. Now, it looks reasonably well, right? Now, if somebody were to steal that data and it used somewhere else, that username and password, they can see that, but they don't have the actual password. They have the hashed password. So that thief cannot do anything much with it. This kind of worked for a few years. But then the thieves realize that the guy who is making username and password, he's also taking accounts on many other websites all over the world. And there are some websites where the security is not very good. And in fact, for all you know, some sites will say, forget it, I'll just put the plain password itself into the database. So the thief does not attack that important site, because it can't be attacked because they've put all these hashed passwords there. Instead, the thief attacks another site and then gets the username and password of that site. Now comes the psychology of people. Many people have got sick and tired of username and password, so they use the same username and password everywhere, which the thief knows that this is how people's psychology is nowadays. So they hack into another site, get the username and password there, then come to this site and try that password out, because there they detected the password and now they got entry here. And that's really, really a bad situation. Let's give it one more twist, and I'll tell you one more thing which is commonly happening on the internet. On the internet, there is another kind of area which is known as the dark net, and that dark net is very secretive, and it's also known as the Tor network. Tor is one browser which allows you to browse on the internet very anonymously. It's very difficult for others to find out where you are located. Now the Tor browser, that black net using the Tor browser, has got a marketplace of real scoundrels and thieves selling all these username and passwords for whoever who wants to buy them. Now, where do they get that data? So one is the way I explained earlier. But there's another type of data which is coming in, which is from actual employees who are employed at some of these websites. What happens is when you give a username and password, this pair goes to the internet. This username and password is taken and it goes to that website on the internet. While going to the website, you can see HTTPS, so it's secure, so nobody in between can steal it. So that doesn't happen because of security of the HTTPS makes it secure. I won't get into the details of that. Just assume that the transportation of the username and password from your computer to that website is secure. Transportation is secure. But the moment it reaches that website actually has to see your username and password in its full glory, in plain text. Why does it do that? Because it has to check whether are you there in that registered database. Now the database doesn't have the password, as I told you. Database has the hashed version of the password. So what they do is that they take the password and then they hash it again in the same way they had hashed it earlier, and then compare these two hashes, and if they are same, they say, okay, you are the genuine guy, so come inside that website. That's what they say. What happens is that in some companies, the guy who's able to access that code on that web, he may be ill-treated, or he may not be paid well enough, and he's disgruntled for whatever reason, or he's simply a thief. So what that guy does, he can write a very easy code for him to retrieve that values and silently store that value inside one USB drive. Or over a few months, he's got a lot of these username and password. He takes that and sells it on the black market, on the Tor network, on the dark net. And there you have it. It's a leakage of username and password. And again, there's a whole lot of havoc which has happened. This has been very rampant. Yes, today morning I woke up with the news that this company called Canva, they have lost all the data. It's available on the black market. When will this stop? So I invented homing space to handle all these particular issues, and I discovered a method that instead of giving username and password at a website, what homing space does is, once you set up an account on homing space and get yourself a username on homing space, you can go to a website which uses homing space way of authenticating a user, and that website will ask, do you have a homing space username? You say yes, and then you give the homing space username there. It doesn't ask for a password. Instead, what that particular merchant site does is that it takes your public key, which is stored with a homing space, and puts an OTP into a box and encrypts that. Okay, and sends the box to you, to your homing space, that is to a site called my.homing.space, which technically belongs to you. At that particular point in time, it is belonging to you. It works in your mobile. So the merchant comes back to you with that particular encrypted box, and only you can decrypt it from your mobile phone. And once it's decrypted using the private key which you have, and it is stored in your mobile phone, the private key is in the mobile phone, it is nowhere anywhere else, and then you let yourself into that particular merchant site. What happens now is the merchant is never storing a username and password at all. The merchant only has the usernames which are authorized to get into that merchant's website, and that username is the username given by homing space. So now, instead of having one centralized username and password database, homing space is a decentralized system where each person keeps his or her own way of authenticating himself or herself into that website. So now the situation is pretty difficult for thieves, because maybe I am a dumb fellow and I may give my mobile to some thief and he can figure out and maybe use my mobile for a few hours, and then steal some of the data or whatever with this homing space, he has to have the mobile in hand, and it has to have that secret key which he can retrieve. And that secret key is further protected by one password. That is a minor detail, and that is only that one password which you have to remember, which protects that secret key inside that particular mobile phone. Now what happens is that he could, theoretically, there could be a thief who has stolen one of these mobile phone, but there is no way an entire website hacking can happen, because there is no username and passwords there, and he has to collect each of these people's mobile phones for him to attack that website. And that's the beauty of homing space. So now there is a better chance to have an authentic experience, because the chance of you coming again into that website with one more account is little less. I mean, if you have one more phone, maybe you could have one more account over there, but you cannot have 500 accounts over there, because you'll have to have 500 different phones to get into that particular site, as 500 different homing space usernames. So the chance of the internet having a much more authentic experience with very less chance of having ghost accounts, or it's known as Sybil accounts in this terminology, and that is not going to happen. Like, it's not that like people can have 200 accounts on the same site. This happened during Dropbox. Dropbox was offering per email address 5 GB. What people were happily doing is that create one more email address and get one more 5 GB for themselves, and or 2 GB, whatever it was. I forget the actual value. So you suddenly have 5-6 Dropboxes, and all of them are free because you just use different email address for that. Imagine the loss of Dropbox. Or you look at what Netflix is facing today. Netflix, people are happily taking an account in Netflix and then sharing that account with everybody else. And Netflix is bleeding money because of that, because a lot of people are sharing their credentials with others. So homing space is one of the products of Limen Leap Labs, where we are trying to solve very wicked and hazy problems, and we are seeing that some real nice work is happening from the laboratory environment of Limen Leap Labs. So this is just an introduction to authentication and how one could use homing space instead of the older techniques. Homing space was recently validated by the CTO of Matrix. They have a product called Riot, which is a instant messenger which aggregates many other instant messengers like WhatsApp and Telegram and Slack, and everything is put together. It's a beautiful messaging system, and they were looking for a distributed way of authentication, and homing space could be one of the candidates which they are now considering. So that's a brief idea about how I work. My name is Abu Francis. I'm the founder of Limen Leap Labs. Thank you so much.